Hello, welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for another session with Gwen today as she continues on the journey of admin in Azure. So if you haven't joined us before, if this is your first time, I'm Rebecca. I'm the event planner for Microsoft Reactor New York. Before we begin, I just always run through a couple of slides here. So our code of conduct, the Microsoft Reactor seeks to provide a respectful environment for both our audience and our presenters. So we encourage engagement in the chat, but we just ask that you're mindful of your commentary, remain on topic, and professional as possible. For today's session, if you, again, if this is your first time joining us, if you've never used YouTube before for a live event, if you want to interact in the chat, you do need to set up an account with YouTube. So if you haven't done that yet, feel free to do that now and just get that sorted. You know, if you're not able to set it up, but you do have questions for us, feel free. If you joined us through maybe the Reactor on Meetup or our main site, you can always send us a message and ask those questions at a later time. Happy to answer. And same like Gwen, she's on a number of different channels. You can find her on Twitter and LinkedIn and things like that as well. So you can always reach out directly to get those questions answered. This session is recorded. It will be available on the Microsoft Reactor YouTube channel for on-demand access probably in the next 48 to 72 hours. I don't believe closed captions is available through YouTube while we're live streaming, but it will be available once the recording's live on demand in a couple of days. Yeah, and then that brings us to today's session. I'll bring Gwen up here. We'll join. Here we go. So today's session is the third one of this series. It was postponed by a few days. So if you originally signed up and you're here today, thank you for working with us on that reschedule. Yeah. And today's session is all about how to configure virtual networks in Azure. Yeah. And it'll be about 45 minutes or so. We'll be going through all that.
Correct. Thank you, Rebecca, as always.
Sure.
A fantastic introduction. I do appreciate people who are checking in, even though or joining us, even though I was set for Thursday. I had the flu for like a week. I still kind of have it, but I'm like a lot more recovered now. I had couldn't talk, throat pain, all that kind of stuff, right? So
you never know.
Not COVID. Not COVID, knock on wood, right? But yes, thank you everyone for joining. We are at third episode, and then this is our third one, and our fourth one is this Thursday, right? So it finishes this Thursday. We end this introduction to cloud administration series this Thursday, which is insane. We've covered a lot. We have monitoring coming up for our last session, and today we're going to do some virtual networks. We're going to take a look at VNets, subnets, IP addresses, virtual machines, and we're going to sort of architect out this and build out this architecture that I have. Do make sure you check in so you can get the link to sort of the content that we're going to be following. And there's additional resources and all that kind of stuff in there in the GitHub repo, right? Let me pull up my screen. We can get started. Where's my, hold on. I'm still kind of drowsy from the...
I was going to pull your screen up, but I saw that StreamYard was in it. So I was like, let me wait a second.
Oh, my mistake. Yeah. I had to move it over.
There we go. So I'm going to duck out here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In the chat, let me know if this size is, as in the font and everything like that, is comfortable. If you want it a little larger, let me see. Perhaps that. Later on, we're going to have a demo. I'm going to have sort of a split screen kind of thing, so it might be a little bit more difficult. But yeah, so like I mentioned, we're going to talk about virtual networks in terms of virtual machines. Since this is an introductory level session, we're not going to go too much into, say, filtering, routing, network security groups, tables, and that kind of stuff. Perhaps we'll do a follow-up series on more intermediate level kind of stuff. But we're going to cover your basics here. We do have about, I would say maybe 10, 15 minutes of theory. Just stuff that I want to cover as much as I can, high level. And then we'll dive into a demo. For our demo, we're going to be sort of deploying this diagram that we have, this architecture we have here. So this is sort of a common, if you're familiar with the concept of a jump box, where you have a public VM inside of a VNet in its own subnet, and then you'll have only that one has a public IP and access to the internet, and then you can access your other resources. So in this case, we had VM2, and then we'll have VM3. These will only have private IP addresses, so the only way we can access this one and this one is via this jump box here. Yeah, so we'll RDP into this one. We'll make sure we can ping VM2, and we'll RDP into VM2 from VM1, and then from the RDP session within VM2, we're going to RDP into VM3 and just make sure they can all talk to each other. Very, very simple, but this is actually like a pretty familiar like foundation in terms of infrastructure that you'll see with virtual machines, right? And so I guess real world scenarios, you would have maybe like a front end and a back end, or like a database on one of these, and things like that, right? Or perhaps you had some sort of application that lives on here, but people have to VPN into this specific machine to access it. There's just a bunch of scenarios that could work with this. Nice is perfect size. Fantastic. Thank you for letting me know. If you have any questions, of course, let me know in the chat. I'd love sort of just throwing them in there in the middle of the session, and we can go through them. Like Rebecca mentions, we're going to aim for like 40 or 45 minutes, and then the rest will just be time for questions. And literally anything cloud computing, anything tech, anything Azure related, feel free to ask. I'll try to keep the questions relative to the session, and then we'll leave like the miscellaneous ones towards the end, right? Alrighty, so let's get started with this GitHub repo that I put together, and a couple of diagrams that I put together, right? So let's talk about a little bit about Azure Virtual Networking first. So the Azure Virtual Network, I'll probably say VNet because it's shorter and it's probably like the most common used over a virtual network. But VNet stands for Azure Virtual Network, right? And virtual networks, virtual networking in general, not specific just to Azure, but in general, they provide a couple of key capabilities. So we have isolation and segmentation. Azure enables you to create multiple isolated virtual networks, and then you can segment that. So you have like sort of a slice, which would be your virtual network, and then you can segment that into more slices, which are called subnets. So your overall your overall network would have an IP address space, and then you would slice that into more pieces, right? And then you have subnets, right? They also enable you to communicate to the internet. So by default, a virtual machine in Azure can connect to the internet, but you can enable incoming connections from the internet by defining a public IP address, or perhaps you have a load balancer with a public IP. And then for VM management, you can use something like CLI, RDP, the SSH secure shell. In this session, we're going to be using Windows VMs, and we're going to be using RDP. If you watched the previous session, which was the CLI, sort of like introduction to the CLI, the Azure CLI, we used SSH. And we use like Ubuntu images. So I'm trying to like mix it up, right? Not to try to keep it too biased towards Windows flavor or Linux flavors, right? Because it's all available on Azure, right? We can also communicate between Azure resources. So it's not only VMs that utilize VNets. There's other things like AKS, scale sets, app service, all those kinds of things. There's almost every single Azure service can utilize a VNet to an extent. So keep that in mind as well. And we can use service endpoints for the services that don't necessarily like directly associate with a VNet. You can use service endpoints for things like SQL databases, storage accounts, and such. And then this will enable you to sort of link multiple Azure resources to your VNets, and then of course improve security and all that kind of stuff, right? Another big one is when you communicate with on-prem resources. So this concept of hybrid. I'm a big fan of hybrid, and I say this from the bottom, genuinely. I believe there's so much opportunity in the hybrid space. And when we talk about hybrid, it's about customers, clients, whatever it might be, who have on-prem environments, but also have some infrastructure or applications or anything really in the cloud, right? So that's what a hybrid concept is. And it doesn't mean that they'll never fully migrate to the cloud or they'll stay fully on-prem or anything like that. They can just be very, very happy with being sort of having a hybrid approach, right? So that's where things like point to site, so VPNs, virtual private networks, come into play. Site to site and Azure Express Route. So point to site is, you have a client computer initiates an encrypted VPN connection to Azure, and that would connect to that computer to the Azure Virtual Network. Site to site would be a VPN that links your on-premise VPN device or gateway to an Azure VPN gateway, and then your entire site would be connected to your Azure infrastructure as well. And then that way, your Azure devices can also appear as if they were on your local environment, right? and the connection is encrypted. This is more of like general concept of a VPN. Like if you've used VPN to like I don't know, access Netflix in another country or something like that, it's just like encrypted traffic, right? And then we have ExpressRoute. So ExpressRoute it's a VPN, but it doesn't travel or doesn't traverse the internet. It goes through the backbone, like the Microsoft like backbone. So this is better when you need greater bandwidth or higher security. This is what you would use ExpressRoute. I'm just taking a look at the comments now before I or questions and things like that. Someone says, please talk slow, very fast. Oh, okay, I'm trying to slow down. This is my natural way of speaking, but I'll try to slow down. All right, and then another capability that we have with VNets is the ability to route network traffic. And because when you think of VNets, you don't, or when you think of networking in general, you don't want absolutely everything to come through, right? It's very, very rare that you want it to be completely open to absolutely every type of traffic, and then be able to send out absolutely every kind of traffic as well, right? But by default, Azure will route traffic between subnets on any connected virtual network, on-premise networks, and the internet. However, you can control and override those settings as follows. So we have route tables. Route tables, BGP or Border Gateway Protocol, and these kinds of things are more intermediate level. We're not going to touch on them here in terms of the demo, but we will cover them in theory, right? East Coast, we're a bunch of fast talkers. we do talk very fast on the side of the US. But anyway, route tables. So route tables are used to like define rules, or when you think of routes, it's like which way to go, right? So rules that define how traffic should be directed, and you can create your custom route tables that will sort of tell like, all right, this packet goes here, this packet goes here, and that kind of stuff, right? You might be familiar with BGP, which would work with an Azure VPN gateway or ExpressRoute to propagate on-premise BGP routes to Azure Virtual Networks. And then not only do we sort of route traffic, we can also filter, right? So Azure Virtual Networks enable you to filter traffic between subnets by using the following approaches. So we have a couple of options here. We have network security groups, an NSG for short, but it's an Azure resource that can contain multiple inbound and outbound security rules. And you can define these rules to allow or block traffic based on factors such as source and destination IP address, ports, and protocol. And then we have a network virtual appliance, which is a specialized VM, right? So so the difference here is the security group is more of like a setting, and then the virtual appliance is an actual VM. And a network virtual appliance carries out a particular network function, such as maybe a firewall lives on there, or it does like WAN optimization, things like that, right? And then finally, another capability that's pretty important in terms of VNets is actually connecting VNets, right? Because when we have one VNet, it's going to live in one region. But if you think of applications that go at the enterprise level, you're not going to want stuff just to be on one region. You want it to be global, right? So you can link virtual networks together using this concept called virtual network peering. Peering enables resources in each virtual network to communicate with each other. And these, as I mentioned, these networks can be in separate regions and allowing you to create global interconnected network through Azure, right? Now, let's talk a little bit about VNet use cases. Let me check in with the chat here. Time to learn while driving. Oh, no. Feels like rapping. That's funny. I used to be a musician. All right. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about use cases. Again, a virtual network, VNet for sure, is a representation of your own network in the cloud, and it's a logical isolation of the Azure cloud dedicated to your subscription. So let's think about the Azure. When we say Azure cloud, we're talking about all the data centers, all the regions, the millions and millions of like servers that are out there, right? And when the keyword here is the logical isolation, because just because you have like a VNet, it doesn't mean you have your own like physical server. Like you can't grab a piece of metal and say like, this is my server, right? It's shared because it's a public cloud, right? But you do have logical isolation. It doesn't mean that your virtual machine will be shared with someone else or things like that. So yeah, you have this sort of slice of Azure that's dedicated to your subscription. And you can sort of utilize this in a couple of ways. And we mentioned private cloud only, which would be you have your environment strictly in Azure. You don't require cross-premise, hybrid, or multi-cloud or anything like that. And when you create a VNet, your services and your VMs within your VNet can communicate directly and securely with each other in the cloud. And you can, of course, still configure endpoint connections for the VMs and the services that require internet connections as part of your solution, right? So this would be like sort of like cloud-only use VNet. You can also use VNets to extend your data center, and you can build traditional site-to-site VPNs like we mentioned before and securely scale your data center. And then we have the hybrid, which is the best of both worlds, right? And it gives you the flexibility to support a range of hybrid cloud scenarios. And then, you can end up connecting your cloud-based applications or things that you have in the cloud infrastructure to your on-premise systems, such as mainframes and Unix systems, or Windows systems, or whatever it might be. Here's a very poorly drawn diagram of what a VNet. So VNet's going to live inside of a resource group, like everything in Azure. And so we have a resource group, and then we have just one VNet. It's utilizing this space that's just 10.0.0.0/16. I'm curious if anybody has experience with CIDR notation, or just in overall just IP addressing and things like that. It's quite a pain. I'm not a big fan of it. I'm not necessarily a professional or anything like that. But I feel like when it comes to networking, it's always like one of those things where people are like, oh goodness, I gotta go pull out the like the networking calculator and stuff like that, right? But do let me know what's your experience with IP addressing, and all that kind of stuff. So that's it. So that's a very high level of what VNets are, virtual networks, and with Azure. But let's dive into subnets. So remember I mentioned that you have sort of like this large slice here, VNet, right? This large, so you have your VNet here, but you don't want to necessarily, I mean, you could for like very simple, like perhaps infrastructure applications, things like that, just directly deploy your stuff into one subnet. And when you create a VNet, you're always going to have one subnet by default. But you sort of get the best out of the concept of a VNet when you plan it out, when you're organizing, when your IP address ranges are not going to overlap and things like that. But we'll dive into that deeper, right? So subnets provide logical divisions within your virtual network, and your virtual network can be segmented into one or more subnets. That's important. You have to have at least one, okay? So keep in mind when you do your planning, you have to have at least one. Each subnet contains a range of IP addresses that will fall within the VNet address space. So what that means is, for example, we have this address space here. Your subnets have to fall within here, right? You can't have like something that's outside of this. The range can't overlap with other subnet address ranges within the virtual network. So we'll see this in a little bit in the next diagram. But each range not only has to be within the address space of the VNet, but also not overlap each other. And of course, the address space must be specified using classless inter-domain routing, or CIDR, or CIDR. I think you pronounce it CIDR, right? Or CIDR. I've always said CIDR, so I'm hoping I'm not wrong. Notation. And do keep in mind also when you're planning that Azure reserves 5 IP addresses within each subnet. And we have sort of a list here of those, but we don't have to like name them all out. So we'll take a look at this this demo of, we have like the internet, and then we have a one virtual machine, and it's got 10.0.1.0/24, which is within the space. Remember, this is our overall address space, and then we have a range here. Our subnet 2 has 10.0.2.0/24, and then our subnet 3 has 10.0.3.0, right? So this is sort of like we're progressing with our diagram here too. And then again, we have our resource group, our one VNet, and then we have our subnet slices here. Let me check in with the chat here. Subnetting. How many VNets can be in a resource group? That is a good question. I'm actually not sure, but there's a if you go to the GitHub repo link, there's a VNet Azure VNet FAQ, and I think it's defined there. I don't know off the top of my head, but that is a good question. Yes, cider. Cider is right. Okay, good. Cider, like apple cider, like what you could, like the beverage, right? I believe that's correct. All right, let's dive a little bit into IP addressing. We're not going to go too into the weeds of CIDR notation and all that kind of stuff. If you've never used sort of like an IP address or like CIDR calculator, I highly recommend you give it a try, because it's a little overwhelming, but it's also it makes you appreciate networking and how it's sort of like this underappreciated skill set that you have to have when you work with the cloud, right? Because a lot of it gets abstracted when we think of, just not just Azure, but like AWS, GCP, all those kinds of things. We sort of take for granted how the networking aspect gets abstracted from us, and we don't have to worry about it. But like, do play around with an IP address or a CIDR calculator, right? So as you may or may not know, we have private IP addresses, and then we have public IP addresses, which we could assign to a resource. So in this case, we have a VM. So you would use a private IP address, and this can communicate in your VNet, on-premise networks, VPN gateways, and ExpressRoute. And your public IP address is a public facing, so things that the public can reach, the internet and public facing services, right? So again, your private IP address used for communication within an Azure VNet and your on-premise network. And when you use an Azure VPN gateway or ExpressRoute circuit to extend your Azure network, and then your public IP address used for communication with the internet, including Azure public-facing services, right? And then we also have this concept of static versus dynamic addresses assignments, right? So an IP address can be either static or dynamic, and the names are pretty descriptive, but we'll dive into that a little more. Number of virtual networks, VNet 128. Wow, it's 128 per resource group, or is it per subscription? Someone look that up, please. Thank you. All right, let's static versus dynamic, right? So IP addresses can also be statically assigned or dynamically assigned. Static IP addresses do not change and are best for like certain scenarios or situations, such as DNS name resolution, where a change in the IP address would require updating host records, right? So if you have a domain assigned to the IP of a VM, you don't want to constantly have to update that, because when you're updating that takes time, and then if you have a lot of people who go to your URL, they don't want to wait around until that gets updated, right? You'd lose money. So IP address based security models that require apps or services to have a static IP address. And then TSL, SSL certificates linked to an IP address, firewall rules that allow or deny traffic using IP address ranges, role-based VMs such as domain controllers and DNS servers. Domain controllers, if you're familiar with Active Directory, it is a pain if you have to like reassign IP addresses. If you've ever worked with Active Directory, let me know. Like on-prem Active Directory, right? But yeah, it could be a pain. And dynamic addresses, it can change when the resource is deallocated. So when say we have a dynamic IP address assigned to a VM, and it could change potentially only when the VM is deallocated, right? So keep that in mind. And static addresses aren't released until a public IP address resource is deleted. If the address isn't associated to a resource, you can change the assignment method after the address is created. So just some high-level facts that I wanted to add about public, private, static versus IP addresses, right? And now we can dive into the fun part, the demo. We're going to be using the Azure CLI for this. Everything we're doing here, we could do with the portal, of course. But since this is an introductory level, I always recommend beginners to everything that you do in the portal also know how to do in a CLI, in a command line, or you can use PowerShell, right? Because your how efficient you can be in the cloud really depends on like how comfortable you are with automating things. And your first step to automating things is using commands, right? Eventually use scripts, and then eventually use infrastructure as code and things like that, right? But it all starts with becoming comfortable with the command line. And we all know that the cloud is just a bunch of Linux servers networked together, right? So, Linux, command line, they all go together, right? So this is what we're going to be using that for today. This is what I think I showed this at the beginning, but we're going to have a VNet and a resource group, and then we'll have one VNet. We'll have this Azure space, and then we'll have 3 subnets, and then we'll deploy a virtual machine. We'll use a Windows 2016 data center image for this demo, and we'll deploy 3 VMs, one in each subnet, excuse me. We'll remove the public IPs from VM2 and VM3, and then we'll be able to access VM1 via public IP. And then from VM1, we'll RDP into VM2, and then we'll RDP to VM3 from VM2, and just make sure we can all this connectivity works, right? Yeah. All right, let's get started. Let me pull up my CLI. Has anyone upgraded to Windows 11, by the way? heard some really cool WSL improvements. I haven't yet. We're gonna do like I think we could probably like do something like this maybe. Is that large enough? VNet, oh no, depends per service. Here it is. 1,000 virtual networks per region per subscription. All right, there we go. Also know how to do in Terraform. Yeah, that's what I meant with infrastructure as code. Whether that be what's going on? Oh my goodness. This was just working.
Every time, Gwen.
This is what I told Rebecca last time. Every single time I do a demo, I have some sort of error. And the funny thing is I'll practice it before, I'll run through it before, and I have no issues at all. But yeah, I'll have an issue when I have to do it live. All right, here we go. We're gonna do. Should I keep this like? Can I do like a side by side kind of thing, like this and this? Is that good? Like if I go like a little larger like that, we just like kind of like follow along. Because
So what do you think of this new view? Is that going to block out too much?
Oh, I think that's good. Let's actually the chat. What is the chat thing? I like that.
Yeah. What is the chat thing? They just added this view where you have like you in the lower corner.
We can't move the lower corner to like top corner?
No,
there's no way to like drag it because there's like a bunch of empty space on the top right. That'd be great.
Not
chat
for
says
long.
This is good though. Chat says,
yeah.
Oh yeah, you're right. All right. You know what?
Yeah.
All right. So that works too. Easy.
We can always change it back to something else, but yeah, I thought this was cool.
Okay, cool. I want to make sure I erased this resource group before, but first we're gonna create it. If not, we'll just change the name. Easy group, resource group. We're gonna say we'll call it VNet demo resource group, and then we'll just provide the location East US 2. Okay, good. I didn't create it before. All right. So first thing we're creating right now is simply this container. If you've worked with Azure before, you know that everything has to live inside of a resource group. So that's what we created now, and it's called VNet demo -RG. The -RG is sort of like a popular convention. It isn't necessarily how you have to name or how you have to end your resource group names, but I think almost everybody who works in Azure. Chat, let me know if you work in Azure. How do you name your resource groups? But I always end in -RG, right? So that's the first part. Also, keep in mind, everything that I create here is going to get erased, so I'm not worried about showing subscription IDs and all that kind of stuff. This is purposely an account for demo, so I get that comment a lot too. Okay, cool. So we have our resource group, and now we can go ahead and create our VNet and a subnet. Now with our VNet command, we can actually go ahead and create one subnet there, and then we'll have like sort of a separate command to create subnet 2 and subnet 3, right? All right, cool. Someone says this is good Codecademy view. I guess this is very similar to a Codecademy view, right? So if you're working with CLI, you know that everything starts with AZ. So AZ, and then your command network, and then your subcommand. So ours would be AZ network, and then VNet, because we're working with virtual networks. But if we do like -help here, we can see that there's a bunch of other options here. We have like all these options. We have the group, which is AZ network, and we have Bastion, we have custom IP, we have load balancer, we have like a public IP, a bunch of things in here too, but we're going to be using VNet. Let's make clear screen. So yeah, AZ network, VNet, create, and then we're going to provide first the resource group. So this -G is sort of just a sort of convention of doing like -- resource group like that. When you're writing scripts, I highly recommend you do like the long convention, just so it's easier for people to read. But if you're doing like one-off commands like this, you can do just -G. And then the resource group is VNet demo resource group, right? And then we're gonna now name the VNet, which is -N, which would also be like -N, but we're gonna do just -N. And we're gonna call it VNet 1 because we're creative with the names, right? Next, we have to provide the address prefix, which according to this diagram that we have here is 10.0.0.0/16. So 10.0.0.0/16. And then we can go ahead and provide the subnet name. subnet dash name, and then we're going to call this subnet 1. And then we have to provide the subnet prefix. Prefix, which for our 1 is going to be 10.0. I think I said 1. Yeah, 1.1.0/24. And I think that's everything we need for this command. Yes, fantastic. Let's go ahead and create that. We should get some JSON output. Yeah, we see here. So the JSON output is just confirming it's been created. We have the address space, which we provided here, which we provided with the command. So it should match. And also when we go into subnets, if you don't provide a subnet, it's going to create one with the name of default for you. But we did provide a name here, so it should be here, subnet 1, and then our address prefix right here, right? Cool. And then we can also use, if you wanted to like bring up this same view for like querying, which we might do later on, you could do AZ network VNet show. I'll just do the -h because sometimes when you need like documentation or any kind of help, you can do -h and it'll give you examples. So for example, let's say examples, get details for VNet, AZ network VNet show -- my VNet -- resource group, right? So that's telling me that I need to provide AZ network VNet show, and then the name of the VNet, which is VNet 1, the resource group, which would be VNet demo -- resource group. And we get that same JSON output, right? Can you change the CIDR block range after the VNet is created? Hold on, what are you running the CLI commands in? Is that PS? This is the CLI, right? So you have the option to run either this in PowerShell or it's the CLI. I'm a little bit more comfortable with the CLI, but all of this can be done in PowerShell. In fact, in the GitHub repo towards the top, there are resources, and there's a Learn module that actually uses PowerShell for this. It does a lot of the similar things with PowerShell. So if you are more familiar with PowerShell, or you want to learn PowerShell, take a look at that. I think this is this means I'm going too fast. I'm trying to slow down. Okay. Can you change the CIDR block range after the VNet is created? I don't think you can, but again, that's like a FAQ thing. I'm 1000% sure it's actually in that FAQ. So take a look at that. Oh, okay. This app is it's just a Windows terminal. This is the newer Windows terminal that you can get from like the Microsoft Store. I think you can actually get it from GitHub as well. I'm not 100% sure. It might be only the Microsoft Store. But yeah, it's a Windows terminal. It's like the defaults. Like I didn't do anything really to change it. And it's cool because you have like you can open like command prompt, Cloud Shell, Git Bash, and add more things like WSL2 and all that kind of stuff in here. Right? Okay, so where are we at now? So we're here, we got our VNet, and we have one subnet, but now we have to create subnet 2 and 3. So now let's use the subnet command. So step 3, next let's create the subnet 2. So we'll do AZ network, VNet, and then we have another subcommand, which would be subnet, because we're working with subnets. Create, and then we'll call this subnet 2. And then it looks like we need to provide the VNet that it's going to be associated with. So VNet name, call it VNet 1, because that's the name of it. And then the resource group, which is VNet demo -- resource group. And then finally, the address prefix for this subnet, address prefix, which would be 10.0.2.0/24. And let's let this run. We should also get JSON output here, and it just tells us that the prefix was created. Now we're going to run that same AZ network VNet show. So this one here, you know what? Let's first clear this actually. We'll get more space. That same AZ, so just to display the details of the VNet. So we can take a look at the subnets here. So we have subnets, and then we have the name of the subnet 1, and then we should have subnet 2. So they're both associated with the VNet now. Great. Now we just create one more. Clear this. I'll continue answering more questions once we deploy the first VM, because that gives us a little bit of time to wait. But I really want to get this third one done. And then you can guess the third one is actually going to be the same exact command, except the only thing we change is here our address space and then our VNet name, which would be 3. Let's launch that, and then we'll launch the VNet show one just once more to make sure it's actually associated. Let's do a clear again, so we have more space. And here we have, take a look at subnets. Yeah, we'll have subnet 1, subnet 2, and then subnet 3. If you ever want to query stuff with the CLI, so for example, you could run that same show command and just do the query parameter. And say just show me the stuff that's under subnets. I think it's like this. I'll have this, or you could use grep if you're familiar with Linux. You could probably do something like remove that query. Actually, we'll do that same one. Here we go. Query, and we'll just say subnets, and then I think we should be able to just do grep name. And then we'll have subnet 1, subnet 2, subnet 3. So again, as beginners to cloud, very, very, very important for you to become comfortable with how you can filter things, how you can get precise data out of JSON. JSON is fantastic for scripting and programming and all that kind of stuff, but it's not very like easy to read, like human readable, I guess. Another option you have to like sort of format your output is to do like -out table. But you see, there's only certain information that gets displayed in this format, and we actually don't get the information that we need. So that's why you have to use JSON and become comfortable with filtering your output in command. It's very, very important. And grep is extremely powerful. So keep that in mind. All right. Okay, cool. So now we have our 3 VNets. So we're here. We have our resource group, we have our VNet, we have our subnet 1, we have our subnet 2, and we have subnet 3. Now it's time to deploy virtual machines. So that would be step 5. We did we do virtual machines last? I think we did last session. We did a bunch of virtual machine stuff. We did create. We did some public IP addresses with virtual machines, a bunch of stuff, and specifically with the CLI as well. We took an hour to do that kind of stuff. So go check out that session. I don't know, Rebecca, if we have a link to that. If we do, we can add it in the chat. But we're going to use that AZVM.
Yes, ma'am. On it.
Thank you. We have we're going to use the AZVM create, which we also went over in that session. So we're going to need to provide the resource group name, VNet demo-resource group. And then we're going to tell you what VNet it's going to be associated with. So was it name? Oh, wait, hold on. Wrong one here. AZVM create VNet. Okay, so hold on. We got to go back here. All right. Then the -L stands for location. For me, it's East US 2. For you, it might be different. And then this image, I'm going to copy this image part because it's actually pretty long, but we're going to use Windows Server 2016, the latest version here. So we're going to do --image, paste this in here. And then we're going to tell which VNet should be associated with, and that would be VNet 1. And the actual VM, we're just going to go VM1. And then the subnet that I want it to be inside of is going to be subnet 1. I think that's actually everything we need here. It's going to ask us for an admin password so we can RDP into it because it is a Windows machine. It should ask us. Come on. All right, so it's a good. There we go. Hold on. I was going to answer questions, but we'll do this once more. All right, cool. It's running. So let me take a look at some questions here. Is AZCLI object-based like PowerShell? No. So if you're more comfortable with like object-based, you probably should stick with PowerShell. No more PuTTY. Yes, that's correct. PuTTY. I mean, I'm pretty sure people like are extremely comfortable with PuTTY and will continue to use it, right? But the Windows terminal is just fantastic, really. PuTTY has gone potty a long time ago. It's a good play on words, right? let us see here. I think we got all this, the questions. Yeah, I do realize that I may be talking a little fast. It's like there's a lot of content that I'm trying to get through within. We have about 20 minutes left, right? But all of this is recorded, and you can watch it on my channel, on the Reactor channel, played back. I'm sure there's captions available after, right? I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, so it's something about when we use StreamYard Studio, audience. So StreamYard Studio lets us have this nice production value, but it doesn't, when it streams to YouTube for whatever reason, allow for closed caption. I think they're working on it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the recordings, once they're published to our YouTube, so like anything that we did last week that's now up there, like all of her past sessions, will have the CC option. So for even this session, once it's officially live on our YouTube channel. Yeah, we've got a lot to go through.
Yeah, definitely. All right, so our first VM is created. So now we're at here. We have this one here. We're gonna do the same, but we're gonna just switch a couple of names here. We're gonna do same image, VNet 1, and we're gonna call this VM2. Call this subnet 2. Just make sure everything's deployed in a different subnet. And then it's probably gonna ask for another admin password. Yes, because it's the exact same image. To Azure admin 6. Let that run. Does Windows Terminal support SSH? I don't know. Let's. I don't want to like mess up anything, so I wouldn't try it now. I'm not 1,000% sure because I haven't actually tried it. All right, so we're running our second VM here. I usually just SSH from here, this CLI, because I was like my VMs are always deployed in Azure. Yeah, but from like, I mean, if you've done it in PowerShell, then you'll have PowerShell available as well. So we're doing this one right now, and then we have one more, and then we can start RDPing into things. The RDP, you're gonna have to bear with me because once you like RDP and then RDP into another one and then RDP into another one, it can become a little laggy. So I'm hoping we don't have any issues, bumps like that. But yeah. Do you have an open route using route table or is it open by default? Yes, that is a fantastic question. So with Windows VMs, you have your port, your RDP port. I think, what is that? 30, I wrote it down somewhere here. Somewhere here. 3389 is open to automatically when we create it. So we don't have to make any changes there. All right, last VM we need to create. ECS2, latest, VNet name, VNet 1, name VM 2, subnet VM, VM 3, subnet 3. Fun. In a real production scenario, or when you're working professionally in cloud, you would have this all in infrastructure as code, or at least some sort of script. But script is just a combination of commands, right? So becoming comfortable with the commands is important. So you know how to put them together, or even how to just read them, right? A lot of times these things are already created. You just have to like look at them and sort of update them or whatever it might be. Which is also why I recommend you use the long version of commands and not the shorthand ones. All right, we have one more, and then we'll have almost everything. We'll have this, and we'll have this. You know what we can actually do? Sort of open up this in the. I'll go down here just so I know which step I'm on. I don't get lost. Public. Here we go. Okay, cool. We'll go into virtual networks. So just see what's going on in the portal. And then VNet 1, which is the VNet that we created. You see we have subnets. We have our subnet 1, subnet 2, and subnet 3. There's a way to get like a map of your network diagram. I always think it's pretty cool to look at these things. So there we go. We have it might be a little hard to see here, but we have our VNet 1 and then our subnet and then our virtual machines in here that we've just deployed. Subnet there, and then there's a NIC obviously associated with each one. What we have to do now, the next step is take the public IP addresses off 2 and 3 from this NIC, which is associated with each virtual machine individually. Okay. All right, fantastic. So let's go head back here. Let me clear this up. So we have our 3 virtual machines now. The reason I'm going to remove the public IP addresses is because I don't want public internet access to them. I just want public internet access to one. So we have our AZ network, and we'll use AZ network, but instead of using the VNet subcommand, we're going to be using the NIC or the NIC, network interface card, right? I believe. And then the IP config is subcommand, and then we'll update it, and we'll provide all this thing here too. AZ network NIC IP config update, and then the name of its and update, and then the name of the NIC is. Oh, I should look that up. I think it's. Let's look it up. AZ VM NIC list resource group VNet demo dash resource group for the VM of VM2. And it looks like it's VM2, VM NIC. Okay, cool. And then we also need to get the IP config name, which is the AC network NIC IP config list by the nickname, which we just got up here, which is VM2 VM NIC. There. And the resource group, which would be VNet demo resource group. And we're just going to out table because it's easier to see that way. And it looks like the name is IP config VM2. All right, pretty straightforward actually. So now if we can complete this sort of command here, which is going to be AZ network, so just fill in the blanks, right? NIC IP dash config update, and then we'll have the name of the IP config, which in this case is IP. Where is it? IP config VM2. I'll scroll it over. The resource group name, which is VNet demo dash resource group, and then the nickname, is VM2 VM NIC. I think that's it. We have and then we have to tell it the action, which is remove public IP address. Oh, I spelled that incorrectly. Remove public IP address. We'll let that run. 3389. Yes, that is the port for RDP. Thank you very much for reminding me of that. Next, we're going to remove the public IP address from VM3. And last session we took a look at how to use the VM command to list IP addresses, just to make sure there's no public or private IP address associated with this after. So we'll run that in a second too. Windows supports SSH now natively. That is great news. I did not know that. That is fantastic. I'll probably still use the CLI, but if you can do it like straight from the terminal, that'd be fantastic as well. For times that I'm not using VMs in Azure. Does it ask for credentials every time you create a VM? So when you are creating Windows VMs, yes. But when you're creating like Ubuntu or not like Ubuntu Linux based VMs, you typically create like a key pair. So like a key on your local machine and then your key on your VM, so you can authenticate with that. And there's no username for that really, or password for that. It's just like files that you have to generate. But when you're creating your VM, you'll have to make sure you provide the parameter for that you actually want to create a key pair. Right. All right, we're running this command. Let's give it a few. Wow, I thought this was going to be 45 minutes. But even though I'm talking fast, we still have a few minutes. We have like 10 minutes left to get this done. We'll get there for sure. But if you do have any questions, please continue to ask me now while we're in this sort of idle period. Too late. All right, time for the next one. AZ network NIC, and then we could probably just update. This is probably just VM3. I'm just taking a guess instead of having to query, and then this would be VM3 as well. So now we're going to deassociate the public IP address from VM3 as well. And then we'll have this fully built out here. I guess I didn't sort of mark a way to differentiate that this doesn't have a sort of, because internet, just like this, these don't have public IP addresses associated with them. But this is, now we are down here. Fantastic. Thank you for answering my question. Of course, that is what we are here for. If you do have any further questions, you can also reach out to me on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Yeah, it's probably the two best place. Or if you comment in the YouTube video, I'll try to address your question as well. Like after, like when you're watching the recording or something like that. I try to answer as many questions as I can, because I know like sort of getting into this like cloud kind of stuff can be a little overwhelming when you're getting started. So I'm here to help. All right, should take a few more moments and then we can start RDPing into things. Perhaps? No? Come on. That's, when you practice demos, they go a lot faster. I guess we could take a look at, we already built this out here. Connected devices. It's pretty neat to like come into the portal and just like look what's going on, even though you don't necessarily like to get a lot of the work done there. I'm curious, like chat, do you use the portal a lot still? I really find myself using the CLI a lot more, or like infrastructure as code. Like once you become comfortable, that's like going to be your go-to. DHCP option is enabled at VNet or subnet or VM level. I think that's at the, oops, I'm sorry. Oops, NIC level. So that would be subnet level. No. Come on. Let's see. Did I miss any questions?
We need some background sound.
I think we answered this one. Do you have an open? Yeah. So by open 3389 is open by default. Yeah, we need some like Jeopardy.
Jeopardy. I can like, come on for a second and change the screen. Oh.
I'm guessing both route table and SG allow RDP traffic by default. Yeah, that's correct. When you create a Windows VM, it's enabled by default. All right, cool. Cool. So now we're clear. So now we have all our VMs. We can probably do it easy. You know what? Oh yeah, AZVM list IP addresses. I think it's this command that'll let us see the IP addresses, but I'm just going to type it in. Oh, AC. Oh, we'll do that once more. Resource group VNet demo resource group, and then the name of the VM. I think we can provide like VM1 like that. Will it tell us that? Yeah, it does work. And we'll just output this to table. Table here. All right, you'll see our VM1 has a public and a private. Let's take a look at our VM2. Our VM2 only has a private, and then we'll just verify our VM3. It only has a private address. All right, so now let's grab that first one, this public IP address from this one. Oops. And we'll open up good old RDP. Desktop. There. And then choices, different account, Gwyneth, and then we'll type in the password that I provided. You know what? I should make a note of this. Actually, we should be able to just ping things with the name and not the IP address, right? Yeah, because we're in the same virtual network, different subnets, but subnet inter-subnet communication should be enabled by default. I like the CLI and portal both. CLI is more granular. Yes, very true. The portal is great for like one-off things, but then when you have to like go through panes, because you know how Azure is like, just like scroll forever to the right or left or whatever, it becomes like it's time consuming, right? All right, cool. So we are in VM1. So now I should be able to open like a command prompt and type in like just ping VM2, but we'll double check. It's gonna be painfully slow. All right, ping VM2. We get replies. Yes. And then we can also do ping VM3. That might be like really small. I'm hoping everyone can see, right? Fantastic. Let's close this up here. We got a response there as well. We're gonna clear. It's not clear, right? It's like CLS, right? Yeah. We're going to open up remote desktop in here, and then we're going to go into VM2. And then we got to do the same. Azure admin. What's the password? Oh, okay. Sorry. There we go. Yes. Fantastic. So now this is where stuff is going to start to get slow. So bear with me, right? I have a pretty decent local machine, so it should handle this kind of stuff. But let's see. So now we're in VM2. If I move this around, you should be able to see. Yeah. So we're in VM2. And, once you're in your sort of actual network, you don't have to connect to things with IP. You should be able to just use the actual computer name or VM name or PC name, whatever you want to call it. And now we're in VM2, and then from there we will open up another command line and sort of do like the same activities there. Come on. A few more minutes. Wow, I really thought I was going to get this done in 40 minutes. All right, come on. Does anyone do any Windows administration, Windows sys administration, things like that? I'm curious. I have a funny question for you. What's like the oldest server that you maintain? I remember when I was a sysadmin, I think we had 2008 servers still hanging around, which was painful. Oh my goodness. When we would have to update them, they would always just spin for hours. Come on. I clicked you. Here we go. All right. So in here, we can ping VM3, right? And we should also be able to do ping VM1. And fantastic. And then we could also RDP into VM3, but I'm going to end it there because we're short on time. All right, we'll close this. Then we'll close this one. We'll hit OK. We'll close this one as well. And then finally, we get to do a fun part where we delete everything. Azure admin, very cool. We do Azure group, I think group delete, and then we just provide the name of the group, and we're just going to delete the entire resource group, VNet demo, which is why I love resource groups, because it's so easy to just get rid of absolutely everything you just created by deleting your resource group. Obviously, some things have restrictions, some policy locks and things like that. But that will delete that, and that will be the end of this session. Let's go back to full camera mode, unless you want to watch things delete, but it's not really that fun. I guess we could do this sort of view. Oops, hold on, my mistake there. This will probably take a few minutes or so, but we could do full this there. And then I'm here to answer questions. We have like 2 or 3 minutes. You can ask me anything cloud computing, tech related. I don't know, Azure, anything really. Let me know. Let's see. Oh, I'm trying to scroll down. Hey, Rishabh. Oh, that's like RDP, arrow, RDP. Yeah, RDPception. Azure admin. Very cool. Very cool. Very cool. Sysadmins are pretty much cloud administrators now, right? With hybrid and cloud computing being like it's like a staple now. I think everyone has some sort of cloud infrastructure. There's a couple of use cases where it's only, or like customers where it's like only on-prem kind of stuff, right? But very cool. Yeah, I think we could call it. Rebecca, I don't know if you have anything to add.
I was here. I was like waiting. Let's see. Well, what is that? A simple question.
I have a simple question. How do you define serverless computing? Serverless in general is basically any kind of service out there that you don't have to do any maintenance or provisioning for. So that can come into serverless databases, serverless storage, serverless, serverless functions, serverless compute, all those kinds of things, right? So the concept of serverless is just any kind of service that you don't have to do maintenance and provisioning for. Because AWS, MS, and CSP have different definitions. Yeah, that's it. It's just, I think we tend to think serverless is just like functions as a service, where it's like, no, it's really just any service where you don't have to like take care of maintenance and such. Yeah, I think that's what we got for this one.
Cool. So Gwen talked about it earlier on in the session. I'm going to plug it again. This Thursday is the last of the session, of the series, excuse me. So if you've been tuning in, if you have an interest, to continue, please do. And definitely check out, I shared in the chat the links to the series page and the playlist for YouTube for the past session. So if you missed any of those, definitely look at that, and then, come back for Thursday. And what?
I was going to say, I reckon it would be great if the whole series can be put together as a playlist on YouTube. I'll have to organize it on my own channel, but I know the Reactor channel has it as a playlist, right?
Yeah, we've got it as a playlist. So yeah, and if you are interested but you can't make it, again, give it a couple days, go back to that playlist, and the last session will be up. We have the check-in link for, it's live even after, so on demand, if you need those resources again, that check-in page stays active. So you can definitely follow along with that. And then I dropped in the chat our survey. It's like most of the surveys, we're asking a little bit, like every survey you get, yeah, just like every survey. Just a little bit about yourself, like what level you're at, what's your background, those sort of things. Because we use that information, I'm pretty sure we do on the I'm not on that planning side, but I'm pretty sure we use that to figure out, what's good content that we can give you, the community. And all this stuff is free. So it's, free. You help us, we help you, that sort of a thing. Yeah. And then if you're joining us from somewhere else in the world and you haven't heard of the program yet, so the Reactor is about 11 or 12, I think we're up to 11 right now, physical spaces, but we're virtual right now. So even if you're not necessarily located adjacent to one of our locations, if the timing works, like our friend from New Zealand, you definitely can tune in. There is a Australian Sydney Reactor location, so there's definitely some sessions that happen out of that one that are probably more in tune with your timing and everything.
There's always something going on.
Yeah, we always got something. So
always a good time to learn.
That's my plug.
All right, everyone. I'll see you hopefully this Thursday at this same time, 6 p.m. And then we're going to finish off the series with some monitoring stuff, which is also very, very important when it comes to cloud administration. And that's it.
Ciao.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.